And welcome, everybody, to another amazing week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Big show for you. You know, we're going to be talking about Fayette County Public Schools here in a bit at the end. I'm not going to start off with that, though. I've been posting a lot about it. We'll go into why that whole story there, why everybody in the state should care, because it is actually kind of a crazy story. Also, but first we'll be starting off with some stories talking about the various important, quote unquote, at least important in some people's minds, races going on in the state in the primaries. Primary for the federal Senate seat, primary for the 6th District Congress with Andy Barr running in that federal Senate seat. We will take a moment to just talk about little updates, little news there. I want to dig into Senator Robin Webb switching parties from Democrat to Republican. I haven't had a chance to weigh in on that. I know that obviously occurred, I think, like a week or two ago. I just haven't had a chance to dive in on it and talk about it. And I definitely want to go ahead and take some time to do that. So we're going to have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure you're telling others to tune on in. Obviously, as we saw this week, being able to go ahead and share information, getting information out there, especially with this new modern age of social media and digital information, it really does make a difference as people have been able to stay informed on the kinds of things that necessarily they wouldn't as much pay attention to just because it's not right there in their face. So we'll be digging into that. Make sure you share, though, this out. That was the point of that little bit there. Make sure you share it out. You can also head over to theandrewshow.com if you're watching this on TV or listening to this on the radio, and check out the podcast where you can go ahead and tune on in there if you want to avoid most of the ads. Podcast still has some ads, but you can get a little more congruent of a listening experience. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So we've got some updates going on in that federal Senate race. A friend of mine recently got a survey on Nate Morris. Nate Morris is the third undeclared person that some people have talked about jumping into the race. He seems pretty interested. My sources are telling me he will be declaring here soon. By the time you listen to this, he might have already declared or made an event announcement, but I've heard per se that he's preparing to announce, but that's all hearsay. It could not be. Who knows? He could be making a totally different announcement. But anyways, that's what I've heard. He's going to be announcing soon. So a friend of mine getting that survey tells you that they're kind of taking a look at where they're at, where they could be, if it's coming from his campaign, could be coming from other people's campaigns, trying to figure out how much of a risk, how much of a threat is Nate Morris to them. So we'll be following along to that. But there's also been talk about Scott Jennings jumping in. Now, a lot of people are excited about the idea of Scott Jennings. I have to tell you all, while Scott Jennings has his good sides, absolutely seen him owning the libs on CNN, there is some downsides to Scott Jennings. Many people don't realize, like, he ran Mitch McConnell's campaigns for several years, ran his super PACs for him. He also has a consulting company here in Kentucky called Run Switch, I do believe, and he has consulted for some good candidates, good people I like, but he's also consulted for some bad ones. I know I've defeated one of his candidates that he was consulting for, and so that's just something to keep in mind, that he's not a anti-establishment candidate at all. He's literally the definition of establishment. Now, you could like his flavor better than maybe Andy Barr's or Daniel Cameron's, if that's your way, and maybe him spending time owning the libs all the time on CNN has helped some of that discussion there, as far as how do we it's realizing how crazy some things are, maybe, but who knows? So that's going on. But with Scott Jennings being whispered about, it's interesting that he did take a trip to Israel. Now, this has become quite an interesting sticking point in modern politics, as AIPAC has been receiving, obviously, a lot of scrutiny. And, I think it's worth a conversation here. If AIPAC is pushing a foreign country's agenda and spending a lot of money in American campaigns and American politics in order to push a foreign country's agenda, That's obviously worth us taking a look at and having a discussing and being a little bit leery of. But it wasn't just Scott Jennings who's been to Israel recently, which some people have taken as an indicator that they're potentially working on an AIPAC endorsement. Now, it's very possible that Scott Jennings went to Israel because obviously he's on CNN all day, CNN talking about Israel and talking about those issues, and going there gives him a better place to talk about it, ability to be a little more in the social media game too as well, indicate to people which side, because on the right side right now, there's kind of a rift on the Israel thing. Some people super pro-Israel, some people, I wouldn't say they're anti-Israel in the sense of they're like, hey, let's nuke Israel. Nobody thinks that other than, obviously some people in the Middle East. But putting that to the side, they do look at saying, hey, look, we're giving a lot of money to Israel, and they're playing in our politics, and they're doing a lot of things, and we don't quite understand why we are so concerned about what's going on there per se, compared to being America first, worried about what's going on back home. So that's like, that's how I'd categorize one side of things. Some people would say, no, there's people on the right who definitely want to see Israel wiped off the face of the map, and hates all the Jews and things. And while granted there may be fringe people for any side, I wouldn't characterize that's a real rift. Nobody really agrees with that. Like maybe 0.1% of the Republicans actually think get rid of all the Jews, or not even Republicans. I wouldn't even call them that. People on the right is characterized by lefties, get rid of all the Jews. Now, I would say there's a lot more people on the left saying, hey, let's get rid of all the Jews. But I think on the right, what you're seeing more so is a rift on why does Israel get special support? Why do we care so much about Israel? We're supposed to be America first. I think that's more the rift, personally. But as you guys know, I don't follow a whole lot of national politics. I mean, I follow it as much as probably you do, who's on social media and listens to podcasts and everything else. And obviously I have a brain with my own thoughts on things, but I'm not going to pretend like I super duper and super into it. But on that subject, though, of going to Israel and that kind of being a prerequisite to AIPAC support, State Senator Amanda Bledsoe recently made a trip to Israel. Unclear on if she paid for it herself or if it was paid for out of some sort of PAC or some other group paying for it for her. But she made a trip to Israel, which is interesting, was called out by Thomas Massey because Amanda Bledsoe is clearly eyeing up that 6th District congressional seat. She was a councilwoman in Fayette County in Lexington for a while. 6th District, of course, biggest city in that area, big central kind of place is obviously Lexington. And so she's eyeing that up. She will definitely be in the 6th District race. Right now you have her heavily eyeing it up, and then you have Ryan Dotson, who's actually declared on the Republican side. I'm sure there may be a few other people that jump in, but Bledsoe's definitely going to be the one that's tied to that kind of establishment type donor networks kind of thing. I'm going to be honest with you. She's been in politics for a while. I've heard her talk a lot. I don't actually know exactly what she stands for. That's always like somewhat concerning to me when it comes to a politician. Like, I know there's certain politicians that really, really care about specific things, and they will throw their full, like, it might have even been the reason why they got into politics in the first place, whether that's, the COVID issues and lockdowns and government overreach. Like, they really care about that side of liberty. Some other people get involved because they really care about property rights, and they see the zoning and the control coming down from the governments creating higher prices and things. So that becomes a big issue for them. Some people get into it because they care about schools and they care about what's going on there. I don't actually know ever that she's taught what exactly outside of, hey, I can be on city council, push her into it. I will say that she's definitely going to be tied in. I mean, they redistricted the state Senate redistricted specifically to give her a walk into that state Senate seat there back in 2022. They districted out me, districted out Ross Mann, who was running. So districted out 2 Republicans who were declared. And I mean, when I say districted us out, I mean just like literally the district, the precinct I was living in, they went, just like right around that precinct, withdrawing the lines to make sure I wasn't in that district that she was running in, because it was an open seat at the time. And then also they districted out the Democrat that was declared in that race as well to give her that clean walk on. So that shows some ties to the establishment, but also there's some other things about her that shows that she will be that more establishment type candidate. So we'll dig into that and then also start looking at this State Senator Robin Webb switching over to the Republican Party. We'll be digging into those things. After this short break, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back here with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were looking at that 6th congressional district race, looking at the two widely talked about, well, one's declared, one's seems to be widely talked about. Amanda Bledsoe, state senator right now, and then state house representative Ryan Dotson, also he's currently declared for the district. Dotson went to D.C. He made some rounds there, making some connections, but we were talking about Bledsoe going to Israel, definitely getting more tied in. I think she'll be the big money candidate, I guess, unless somebody jumps in and just dumps a lot of personal money that they have. She's definitely going to be the big dollar candidate. The big donors are going to hit her up, not just because we've already seen evidence of how she's tied in with that redistricting example I gave and other things that definitionally the establishment Republicans in Kentucky have done in order to help her along. But, you also can look at just her kind of political positioning overall. I mean, you have her husband, who's a big pharma lobbyist. It's just, he's, typically, like I said, I don't like bringing family into the discussion, but in this case, her husband is in politics. He's a lobbyist for big pharma. So that points to her probably bringing in some money from there. What's interesting, too, about her is, and I talked about why, I've heard her talk a bunch of times, and I don't quite know why she's a Republican, I guess. I don't know what makes her particularly conservative. I'm trying to rack my brain. I'm not saying this from I'm trying to say this as a dig or something, but I actually think her husband's a Democrat. At least he worked for Paul Patton, Democrat, obviously in Kentucky here, former Democrat governor, sorry. So he worked for his office at one point, and so you would think, I don't know if husband still is or isn't, but at that time, Democrats were still at least kind of pro-life and somewhat okay with guns and everything else, of course. So maybe as they started being more anti-life and anti-guns, her husband switched and she switched, or maybe she was always a Republican. I don't know. But granted, that, like I said, her husband working for a Democrat governor does leave questions like, what are those convictions there? And obviously, when it comes to establishment politicians, you don't expect a whole lot of convictions in the first place. It'd be nice to have some candidates running for office that feel some sort of convictions. At least you know what you're getting. Otherwise, they're just saying whatever they need to say to go ahead and win. But alas, it's people with convictions don't get the money. And so that's just part of the problem. But speaking of the Democrat Party changing, we have State Senator Robin Webb switching over to the Republican Party. I want to take a moment to speak about this because there's some different sides of it. First, we've seen, obviously, the Republican Party of Kentucky and the state Senate and everybody else applauding the fact she switched over, and I understand why they would do it. It's one-party politics. You want to say, yeah, great, we got one of your guys came over to us, ha, 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 or girls in this case, but one of your people came over to us, ha, ha, gotcha. I understand that excitement there. Also, I understand it really is bruising to Andy Beshear's presidential campaign hopes because his selling point to Democrats as he's out there as a governor from Kentucky that doesn't have a whole lot of nationwide name ideas, that I'm the kind of guy that can bring in that more rural voter. I'm a governor who wins by 5 percentage points in a red state, in a state that Trump wins. I can win back people over to the Democrat Party. I can put a new path forward for us to be victorious. That will be his selling point. That is his selling point. And to the point where even the AP came and did a big article on the Kentucky Democrat Party holding some, listening tours in Eastern Kentucky and how this is going to be their way forward. And then within 2 weeks after that story, you have the last not from Lexington or Louisville state legislator switching parties over to the Republican Party. It's hilarious. It's funny. I too, if my role was that of the Republican Party of Kentucky, which is mainly just to dunk on your political opponents, that's like how they essentially function, fortunately or unfortunately, I too would be having a lot of fun with it. But I do think it's worth us discussing about people switching parties. And I want to start off by first, I think by framing this up about when is it acceptable? When should we say, when somebody switches from Democrat to a Republican, when should we be like very welcoming as individuals to that, like individually say, yes, we got somebody over to our side. That's great. And when should we be leery? When should we be suspicious? And I think it has a lot to do with what they say, what they do. And I'm saying this as somebody who, I spent 3-4 months, I think, somewhere around there, 5 months or so. I was always registered Republican since I was could register to vote. And then for like 3-4 months, I was a registered libertarian. So don't worry, I wasn't a Democrat, but I was a registered libertarian. I left the Republican Party. And then I came back to the Republican Party 3-4 months later. Now, why did that happen? And pay attention to how I explain that switch. And because this is what's important, okay? So before, I looked at the Republican Party and said, this is broken, it's corrupted, it's awful. While I agree with many of the principles they have, they just seem not very principled. And the Libertarian Party bills itself as the party of principle. We're the principled people. We have these principles of freedom and liberty, and we will follow those as far as it goes. And over the course of those 4 months and seeing what was going on, I realized that the Libertarian Party was a mishmash of ideas. It wasn't really for an example, one person's idea of liberty, another person's idea of liberty can be completely different, which creates different outcomes. For an example, one thing I was disappointed with the Libertarian Party was the fact that they had no clear and concise message, either nationwide or statewide, on lockdown policies during COVID, which should be an obvious thing. If you say you're for freedom and liberty, having the government come in and force private businesses closed and all these other things and masking all these other issues should be something that a party that's for liberty should all unite around, but that's not it at all. In fact, I was attacked by other libertarians in the state of Kentucky when I kept my coffee shop open. And so I realized that, but also I realized that while the party may call itself a party of principle, it's not about what the party calls itself, it's about people. Parties are made up of people. And people in power that aren't principled lead to an unprincipled party and unprincipled politicians. If they don't have the principles to begin with, then there's nothing to grasp onto. And I bring that up just to point out that, so as I come in and I realize, like, okay, so what I thought was the Republican Party was corrupted. It is. However, the Libertarian Party would be just as corrupted if they had power as well. And also, I guess you'd call it matured a bit or grew up a little bit or whatever you want to say, and realize that, in a perfect world, the libertarian idea of, especially anarcho-capitalist idea of libertarianism, it would work. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where government has overreached for a long time, and we have to be realistic about the world we live in and realistic about how do we accomplish, the importance of getting to more freedom and liberty while at the same time not essentially putting and allowing the governments and the Democrats, especially when they're in power, to be able to force their wills down and, control everything, basically. So a little bit of growing up. Now, I just described why I switch back, right? Notice something I said. I said that I changed. My thoughts changed. Not the parties. I changed. I want you to keep that in mind because I want you to hear for Senator Robin Webb here as she talks about why she switched parties. Go ahead and take a listen to that.
Not changed. My voting record will not change. It's just sort of where my voting record has landed me. Some cultural issues and Second Amendment issues and just rural value issues. I cited women's sports as for one. We fought awful hard to get to Title IX, and I really don't want to see that undermined as a former Title IX athlete. I was a coal miner, and I value what unions have did to enable me as a woman to be able to pursue my occupational goal and do it in a safe manner. You can look at my fundraising and see how long I've been contemplating this, probably a couple of years at least, because I haven't raised any money, thinking I didn't want to be that person that does that.
So there you go. You heard from her, and hopefully you heard the part I wanted to really zero in on, which is where she said, that while she hasn't changed, her voting record hasn't changed, and it will not change. What has happened is the Democrat Party has changed and left her behind. I didn't leave the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party left me, that adage. And here's the problem I have with that. You see, Robin, when you were wholeheartedly would call yourself a Democrat in 2010, in 2015, and you had no problem maybe with what the Democrat Party was doing, but now you do, and she points out some of the craziness on the gender things and everything else. We'll return to that in a second, because it shows a lack of conviction around those issues. What you're saying is though, if you're not willing to recognize how the beliefs you held, let's say that you say you still hold, but the beliefs that were popular within the Democrat Party in, let's say, 2012, so those beliefs that were popular in 2012, you still hold today, and you haven't changed, which is what she said. You have not recognized how your beliefs in 2012 led to the issues we have in 25. That over those 13 years, your beliefs ended up with the very idea of your thoughts led to where we are. And if you're not willing to recognize that the very basis of your ideology leads to what the Democrat Party is today, all you're doing is joining the Republican Party to, and if you stay in the Republican Party, to make changes because you're going to want to influence what happens, what policy Republicans pass, and to end up influencing the Republican Party to become the Democrat Party of 2015. And if the Republican Party is the Democrat Party of 2015, and the Democrats are whatever weird thing they are now, fast forward 13 years, the Democrats will be way off in the crazy zone. I don't even know where they'll be, but the Republican Party will be where the Democrats are today, which is the very thing that you, Robin, have said you don't want. You want to do. So if your very core beliefs haven't changed, if you don't come out and say, now the Democrat Party changed, but you say, I had these thoughts about things, these liberal ideologies, and I've realized as I've watched the Democrat Party decay that those very basic beliefs I had and ideas lead to the kind of craziness we see today. And watching that happen has really changed my mind, where I now realize that the conservative ideology of self-determination, of not having government get involved in private industry, and those types of ideologies, not things necessarily the Republican Party always falls through on, but the ideologies of conservatism, I realize are right. And since I've realized that now, I'm now in line with a Republican Party than I am a Democrat Party because I've learned from my mistakes. That is the kind of statement that makes me say, okay, this person is ready to go ahead and be a Republican, be a conservative. They're not going to be a net negative. However, I don't think Robin Webb quite is at that point based upon her own words, and need but look at her voting record, because we heard her just talk about some of the gender craziness, and that's what brings an interesting notes to her voting record. Because now granted, Senator Robin Webb does have a better than all the Democrats by far rating by the Family Foundation. So we're going to look at the Family Foundation rating on their pro-family thought process, their pro-family beliefs. But we'll be looking at that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you are back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were digging into Robin Webb switching parties, good thing, bad thing. I kind of made my case on why we should be a little leery based upon the words she has said. But I said I'd start looking at her voting record. And for this, I'm going to head over to the Family Foundation's pro-family rating. They have a few key bills that they call it pro-family. I'd call it mainly at least pro-conservative. I'm not saying I agree with everything the Family Foundation puts forward or does, but in large parts, I agree with 99% of what they do. And I think their rating can be trusted as a pretty good idea of how, if a person is really conservative or not. And so looking at that now, we'll see that Senator Robin Webb has by far and away the best rating out of any Democrats. She has the Family Foundation has her at a 75% pro-family rating. The next Democrat after her is only a 26% rating. So she's definitely not, I mean, her voting record is definitely not like her peers. And that's been apparent for a while. However, the problem is if her now being a Republican would put her at now the lowest rated Republican in the Senate. And it's not particularly close because the next lowest rated Republicans, there's several of them, is rated at 86%. So she's by far and away better than Democrats, but she would be by over 10% the lowest rated Republican now in the Senate. And let's be really, really honest here. The voting record I'm about to go through would be this one that gets this person primaried in a heartbeat in a Republican primary and gets them beat. I mean, we all saw what happened with, Killian Timoney there in the 45th district in 2024. He had a very similar voting record to what Robin Webb does. And he, despite spending $400,000 compared to Thomas Jefferson, who spent $50,000, was beat in the primary by 75%. Thomas Jefferson got 75%, and he got 25% of the vote. He was beat by over 50 points, or right around 50 points or so. That's really bad, especially for how much money he spent because he can't run away from his voting record. And Robin Webb isn't far off. So let's go over some of the votes they talk about here. Now, Senate Bill 2. She voted no on. Senate Bill 2, and this is where it goes back to her statement, because remember, she talked about how the gender craziness on the Democrats is insane to her. However, she votes no on Senate Bill 2, which was a ban on taxpayer funds funding transgender surgeries. So she voted no. What it did was it banned paying for transgender surgeries of prisoners at the state level, of course. And then also it banned taxpayer funds going to pay for transgender surgeries. That includes Medicare, Medicaid, paying for hormones and surgeries and other gender transition services for those individuals. So at the same time, she says that the men and women sports thing, that's crazy, men aren't women, whatever. She's voting no on banning the use of taxpayer dollars to fund those very surgeries for these same sick individuals, mentally sick individuals, that are men that think they're women or women who think they're men. That doesn't make much sense here. I mean, in a Republican primary, let's be honest, consultants would have a field day with that vote. She also voted yes on House Bill 90, which is about freestanding birthing centers, but then voted no when it came time to veto override. She did the same thing on Senate Bill 19, which Senate Bill 19 allowed for a moment of silence at the beginning of the school day. They didn't. It wasn't for prayer per se. You could pray with that time, but just a moment of silence for students, and then also it allowed moral instruction that would be free with parental consent off school grounds for up to 1 hour during the week. Basically, churches or other type religious or moral institutions, as defined in the bill, could come to the school and take kids off campus if the parents consented. The parents would have to consent to this. Could take kids off campus to the church or wherever else for up to an hour a week to give them what's called moral instruction as determined by the bill. Basically saying that, hey, if you want your kids if the church is offering a free program for your kids during the week, and you want them to, instead of spending an hour at study hall, go to youth group for an hour, then you could decide to have your kid go ahead and do that. And any religion would be free to go ahead and do that. It wasn't limited to just Christians. She voted yes at first and then no on that. So it does lead to, and of course she didn't sponsor any of this legislation anyways. And if she had, it would have made it bipartisan legislation, all this pro-family legislation that the Family Foundation looked at. She didn't sponsor any of it. Could have, but didn't. So that's what I mean when we need when we have people switching parties like that. And like I said, I understand why RPK, Republican Party of Kentucky, would be celebrating this. It's egg in the face of Bashir. I get it. But at the same time, before we go super crazy, saying, oh, great, she's just like us, maybe we should take a moment to look at that voting record, look at her own words and say, I don't know if she quite gets it yet. She may be a Republican, but I don't think she's really a conservative yet. But maybe she'll change. Maybe over time, and as she sees the response from Democrats, she might recognize her ideology that she says she's had forever was fundamentally flawed and leads to the problems she sees on the Democrat Party today. And if not, well, she can always lose a primary. So talking now about Fayette County Public Schools tax issues here. This has been a big thing I've been posting about, why everybody should care. First off, all of you should care about this story because all of you are funding Fayette County Public Schools. Literally, if you are living in America, you are somehow, some way funding Fayette County Public Schools. They take in federal dollars, they take in state dollars, and if you live or work in Fayette County, you should also super duper care. But even if you're just a resident of the state, the amount of tax dollars you're putting forward into that, thousands upon thousands of dollars a year coming from the state per pupil, and then thousands upon thousands of dollars a year coming from the federal government, you should care. It's taxpayer funds, and that's why I think this story is so important to dig into, because this spending here is out of control. And how'd this come to the surface? Well, about 2-3 weeks ago, Fayette County Public Schools, illegally, mind you, called a meeting. Illegally because they did not give enough notice to allow public comment during the meeting to have this vote. And what they realized is for this $848 million budget, that was their proposed budget, which, by the way, for anybody who cares, they're spending $2,648.72 a year for every man, woman, and child living in Fayette County. Right around 320,000 or so people live in Fayette County. Only 40-ish thousand students attend Fayette County. They're spending $2,648, literally a human being in Fayette County for children. I mean, it's astronomical. You think what that means for a family of four, or if grandparents, you have grandparents, you've got parents, kids, you got people who don't have kids. They're all, if you even it out, $2,648 a year. That's a lot of money. And to look at, too, why this budget is so big, we can look at 2017. In 2017, their budget was $492 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $644 million in today's money. That is an over 30% increase in budget adjusted for inflation. Despite that, over that time since 2017 to today, over those 8 years or so, student body growth has only grown by 4%. So if we take the adjusted for inflation amount of $644 million, we see a 30% growth increase in budget, and then the student growth has only been 4%. So if we adjust for inflation, add the 4% on, if they were even keel with 2017, their budget today, accounting for both inflation and student body growth, would be $803 million. But instead, they cooked up $848 million. No wonder why they came back and said, look, we're like $16 million short on our budget. We don't know where it's going to come from. We're going to have to raise taxes. That led to the illegal vote, which then led to what happened next. We'll be going into that after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you are back here on The Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were talking about Fayette County Public Schools spending budget, going through this whole story of what's been happening to them. And it's actually a great example of how activism can work in Kentucky. So they put forward this budget that $848 million, which, as we went over, if we account for inflation and growth, if we kept spending at 2017 levels, it'd be $803 million. And you know what? We don't even got to go back to there. Like, what if we just went to 2019? right? So in 2019, they had 41,251 students. And today, they have 41,697 students. So that's an increase of 446 students, or about 1% increase of student body. So did we just increase the budget 1% then past 2019? COVID's over. The COVID money went away. What do we have left? Well, $670 million adjusted for inflation would be $795 million in today's money from 2019 to today. That is depressing, that inflation so much. Every time I do inflation for 6 years difference, it just blows my mind. Anyways, so an increase of $8 million to the $795 to match student body growth. So if they just wanted to keep equal to their 2019 spending levels before the COVID fat on the hog money came in, they'd be at $803 million, $45 million less than what they have slated themselves to spend. So naturally, they don't have it because the federal funding has gone away. They're spending $40 million more, adjusted for inflation, adjusted for student body, than they were in just 2019. So, of course, they don't have the money. They need to make adjustments. They need to raise it because, you know what, cutting it would be too difficult for them to do. That wasn't an option for them at the time. Their tune has since changed. So they come forward and they say, we're going to raise our portion of essentially the income tax. There's an occupational tax that goes on within counties where they are charging a payroll tax to the businesses on business payroll that occurs within their county. So it's a little bit different than income tax only because it isn't just who lives in the county, it's whoever works in the county. So even if you don't live in Fayette County, but you travel into Fayette County to work and then travel back out, you're still funding our public schools in Fayette County because, well, you're paying an occupational tax to them. In fact, Fayette County collects a lot of different taxes. It's not just property tax. They have an LLET tax. They have a tax on the profits of businesses within Fayette County. They have a tax on the payroll of businesses within Fayette County, an income tax within Fayette County. It's significant. Insurance tax, phone tax, they have taxes on everything. Tax every way they can, all going to the school. So they decide they're going to raise their portion of the occupational tax by 50%. So at the time, they were at 0.5%. They're now raising it to 0.75%. For those of you who aren't super great at math, 0.5% to 0.75, that's a 0.25% increase. That's a 50% increase over 0.5%. And this raise of taxes would have resulted in $30 million more in taxes. Over $30 more in taxes they would have gotten. So to fix a $16 million shortfall, they decided they needed to raise taxes over $30 million. No wonder why our kids can't do math. They're being taught by a school district that thinks 30 and 16 are the same number. But instead, they went for the whole goose. They said, why hold back? We're short. Let's go. Let's double it. Double it, baby. Let's go for over 30 million. Let's do it. 35 million. What's holding us back? 100 million. Let's go for all we could get. It's just taxpayer funds after all. So, of course, raising taxes by 50%, the income tax, that's an eyebrow raiser. And some people took notice. Now, we happen to have, by we, I mean myself and some other individuals that get highly involved in filing open records reports and collecting up those information, and a lot of group of people. So for those who've been following my posts, if you think, you know, oh, Andrew's posted about this all by himself, he did all this work. I didn't do all this work. Now, granted, I dig through 300-400 pages of documents, but I didn't get the documents. Somebody else files the ORRs and brought them in. And it's funny, too, the same data led to the superintendent in Berea, because that was one of the districts that were also in the ORR batch, ended up getting fired over first-class travel. We'll get to that. But anyways, the travel problems. So these open records requests show a troubling spending pattern. So if you're going to turn around and tell a county of people and say, we need to raise your taxes 50%, you better have your finances almost basically impeccable. There better not be a questionable cent, or at least a cent that you can definitely argue for. Like, if you're spending too much money, it better be for directly going to the kids. But that's not what Fayette County Public Schools was doing. No, instead, they were spending money in all kinds of crazy ways. And with access to those open records requests and digging through all those documents and files and forms, and start putting together some different posts on the matter that started getting some notice. In fact, one of the posts, the ice cream posts, many of you probably saw, it reached over 1.4 million people. So it was a pretty big reach there. So at first, though, I started posting about some of the smaller charges, like $900 at Malone's for steak dinner, $1,200 for a peach cobbler and fried chicken for the DEI affinity group. That's they have this race group and this affinity group, they call it, and they get catered meals like every month. And one time they spent $1,200 buying peach cobbler and fried chicken for the group. In fact, we had access to their credit card statements, and in 1 month, in the month of October of last year, they spent over $15,000 on takeout restaurants. They did a Bites of the Bluegrass food tour. They did dine in, take out. I mean, any way you can eat food, they ate food. And I don't think one single crumb of that food ended up in a student's mouth. No, it was all, and I don't think it ended up in an actual teacher's mouth. I think all of it were going into the mouths of the administrators specifically. And now you may say, Andrew, look, these are small amounts of money, $900, $1,200. Yeah, $15,000 a month is a fair amount, but that only equals out to $180,000 a year. You're talking about a budget of $848 million. You got to start boiling down to some larger cuts. Well, before we get to cutting tens of millions of dollars in your construction budgets on buildings you don't need, property purchases you should have never bought, you need to sell now. Before we dig into that, if we can't agree on not spending $900 at Malone's Steakhouse, or not buying $1,200 worth of peach cobbler and fried chicken for a group meeting, or not spending over $15,000 a month on restaurants, if we can't agree on that, if we can't agree on something simple like $900 at Malone's, how are we going to agree on you cutting out $80 million of your budget, $40 million of your budget that you're overspending? Even if you just kept your spending levels the same in 2019, if you're going to sit here and say, we need the $900 Malone Steakhouse dinners, it's important. Our students can't learn to read unless we're eating filet mignon. If that's going to be your argument, we can't even talk about your $50 million construction project. Your STEM school for girls that you paid a mansion for, 9,000 square foot mansion for, we can't even have that conversation. Can we? So that's why we start off with some of the basic things. And of course, you had these leftist apologists always come out on these things, but it was a very small percentage because this did cross over party lines. I got messages from people definitely on the left telling me that they disagree with me on like everything, but I'm right here because it's not just that they're spending so much, it's that they're not spending it on children. And at least, there's times when we look at waste, fraud, and abuse at the federal level, like spending X amount on LGBTQ programs in a foreign country. There's literally a fundamental disagreement on whether we should be spending money on that in the first place. The right would say it's a waste. The left would say, no, that's a good thing. I like it. But it's something different when you say they're spending $50 million on LGBTQ whatever in Africa, but the administrator of that program is flying on a private jet back and forth 10 times a month to places other than Africa, to Germany, Japan, all over the world, using that money for that. Everybody now disagrees, okay, that's messed up. We may disagree on whether or not we should be spending this money on this item, but we all agree that that money shouldn't be spent that way. It's not even going to the purpose. And that's the problem Fayette County Public Schools discovered. Because when they were spending things like $120,000 in 1 month, actually, Fayette County Public Schools spent over $3 million last year, I believe $3.6 million last year, on travel and hotels and flights for their staff, which is more than Jefferson County Public Schools, which has twice as many students. And so you can look at that and say, look, they sent their superintendent to Australia. Fayette County Public Schools did. Paid like $6,000 for him to go to Australia. What's in Australia for him to learn? Get back here. The students are in Fayette County. They're not in Australia. And, so that leads to calling out. One of the posts that did big was obviously the ice cream post on $32,000 on ice cream. Part of the reason I think it did big is because I accidentally put a math problem in there that I didn't think people would struggle with, and they did. But, what the defense for Fayette County Public Schools is, they say, well, hold on. And this is their thought process. This is what tells you that we're messed up. Their thought process was this. They said, look, that money was donated, Crank and Boom. That $32,000 was originally $48,000. Crank and Boom, who we bought it from, took $16,000 off the top. And then we got $32,000 donated to us. Well, who donated it? The construction partners did. 10 of the construction companies doing work for Fayette County that Fayette County's paid millions to donated $3,200 each to buy this ice cream for the teachers. So couldn't we have just gotten a $32,000 discount on the construction then? You don't get to say, yeah, we paid tens of millions to this entity, but then they donated back a small pittance of it. So really, this was donated funds. This wasn't taxpayer funds. You're just laundering it through them. It may not came out of this line item budget, but you just laundered it through them and said, hey, why don't you pay for ice cream for our teachers? And just add that. Add that as a line item there on the invoice. Oh, thank you so much. Just cost of doing business with Fayette County, I guess. And if you think they're not pricing that in, you are mistaken. They are. So instead of getting a $32,000 discount on construction, or if you're collecting up funds, you can bring in money, because at the same time that they spent $32,000 on ice cream, there was a debate going on over cutting the art teacher at Cassidy Elementary or the school newspaper from Henry Clay High School. They ended up not. They said they found the money, but they never did a donation drive from their construction partners to hire another art teacher or keep the school newspaper going or for anything that benefited the kids. No, instead they brought in $32,000 to buy a $6 cup of ice cream for the teachers and the administrators. And I'm not saying the teachers don't deserve anything at all. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, though, if you go up to the teachers and ask, do you want a cup of ice cream? Or do you want there to be another art, or should we fire this art teacher? You can have your ice cream, but we have to fire this art teacher. What are they picking? And if the teacher says, I want the ice cream, forget that teacher. They're a horrible person. Everybody should sit there and say, I can buy my own $6 cup of ice cream. So spending $32,000 on this, why don't you spend $32,000 on something that is good for the kids or leads to jobs, or instead, so you don't have to fire Sally down at Cassidy. Give her that money so the kids can continue to learn and do art. But, that makes just too much sense. So this comes out. A lot of pressure comes in. The public gets upset as this information becomes more and more public, is dripped out there. But not just me, but other people post about too. And then this leads to now the auditor getting involved. And the auditor says, you know what? This is a big tax increase. We're seeing a lot of information about questionable spending. You need a full audit. And then the AG comes in and says, you know what? That vote was illegal. And you can't move forward with this. So then the fiscal court says we're not going to take a vote on whether or not to approve your tax because it was done illegally. So now Fayette County Schools had to go back and do a revote. They were going to do the vote virtually. I'm not kidding you. They have to travel in person. They got to spend millions a year on traveling, but a vote on raising your tax is 50%. A vote that raises over $30 million more in taxes. We had to do that virtually. That's what they were going to do. The audit comes out, though. They see the backlash. They say, okay, we're going to table it. Instead, we're going to form a committee, and we're going to figure out how to cut our budget down $16 million. So apparently that was always an option. It was apparently always an option for you to just cut your budget instead of raising our taxes, but yet you decided not to. Funny how that works until the audit comes. And then when the audit comes, you're like, oh, well, hold on here. I guess maybe we don't need to raise your taxes after all. Y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. We'll see you back here next week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.